Good day. I am Sherilyn Francis, and we welcome you to part 8 of our FAM Strong 20 virtual series. Additionally, we invite you to connect with the MSM PRC via your favorite social media platform using hashtag FAMStrong20. The mission of the Morehouse School of Medicine Prevention Research Center is to advance scientific knowledge in the field of prevention in African American and other minority communities, and to disseminate new information and strategies of prevention. The MSM PRC strongly holds to the applied definition of community-based research, which is dynamic, prioritizes community and research entity partnerships, is focused on prevention, tailor-made, ethnically and culturally focused, and prioritizes health policy to advance health equity. I now present to you part 8 of the FAM Strong Family Meeting Series entitled Our Bodies Part 2, Chronic Disease Prevention and Management, presented by Dr. Reba Kelsey and Ms. Wendy Banowski. And now Dr. Kelsey.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to share information and connect with people around issues of health. And so as we discussed our topics for the day regarding chronic disease, there were some kind of key points that we wanted to make sure that we covered. One was making sure that we were all on the same page as to what is a chronic disease. And so we'll talk a bit about that and why it's important, particularly to African American and Latino communities and to communities of the indigenous people of North America. We'll also talk about, some bit about prevention and certainly a little bit about management. And we want to really stress the importance of proper management and control of chronic diseases as it relates to COVID-19. And I'll promise that I'll stay within my time in doing that. So what I'll do is just kind of give some overarching ideas and hope that we'll be able to do more of a discussion around those things that you as the audience are most interested in discussing or knowing more about as it relates to that. So what is chronic disease? So chronic disease is any disease that lasts more than a year and requires ongoing maintenance, monitoring, and often medication. Chronic diseases also have the ability to cause complications. And we'll talk about some of those complications. And in some instances, chronic diseases may be the cause of other chronic diseases. In the medical world, we call those comorbidities, but they can, if not treated properly and controlled, can lead to other diseases and certainly complications. So some of the examples of chronic diseases would be hypertension, diabetes, obesity, even other heart disease, kidney disease. We see very prevalent, particularly among, and lung disease, but particularly among African American and Latino communities. We're seeing really the diabetes, hypertension, obesity, occurring very frequently, kidney disease, particularly in African American communities. Now, just to kind of give a sense of what I mean about them being far more prevalent or far more common in these communities, is that when you think about diabetes, for example, where about, excuse me, you have significant numbers where you have, for example, 23% in African American communities, whereas you may have around 14 or so percent in Caucasian communities. If we talk about hypertension, we're talking about numbers on the order of 60% or so, and then whereas they're more along the lines of about 40% in non-Black communities. The significance there too is that while the rates are very high, we also find that the rates of control are much lower in those in Black communities. And so what that means then is that you have many more people who have the disease and many more people who may have the complications of the disease because it's not as well controlled. So in the case of diabetes, and so for the case of, I'll talk about hypertension since I was mentioning rates of hypertension. So, some of the complications that we talk about are the risk of problems with vision, risk of problems with the kidneys. And so you see people needing to have dialysis, risk of heart attacks even, the risk of stroke. And we see even stroke, which is occurs at higher rates in non-white communities. And so that's the reason why it's important then to control, whether it's through lifestyle management or medication. And really more often than not, it's really a combination of the two. That helps to control those diseases. Now, when we talk about diabetes, many of us know family members or friends, even may have personal experience with diabetes and the complications of those. And some of them are the same as the ones that we see in hypertension or high blood pressure. So those are going to be, again, problems with vision, increased risk of heart attacks, increased risk of the kidneys failing, problems with even the nerves in the feet, for example. And so that's the cause of, you may know some people who've had to have amputations who have diabetes. So all of those are what we call complications. And these are things that can occur when these chronic diseases are not well controlled. So again, chronic meaning that they are ongoing, lasting for more than a year, and that they do require management by medication and lifestyle changes that help to make sure that they're under good control. So those are examples of some of the chronic diseases that we see. And then we can talk some about why they're higher in these communities at another time. But there are some reasons that do focus around late diagnosis, some limitations in terms of cultural competence of providers, lack of trust we know does exist in the community. And so those are all things that do need to be addressed. Now, as it relates to management, I won't go into specifics on that, but it is important that for those who are diagnosed with these chronic diseases, that they do see their doctors regularly, that they're taking their medication regularly, and that they are engaging in the lifestyle changes that really will help to keep them in control. And these lifestyle alterations or lifestyle modifications that we talk about are the same ones really that help to promote healthy living generally. And so those are going to be things like exercising regularly, eating a healthy diet that is primarily fruits and vegetables. So having at least half of your plate comprised of fruits and vegetables, and then a quarter of that being some form of protein, and then another quarter of that being grain, and making sure we're getting adequate amounts of calcium, making sure that we're drinking plenty of water, that we're limiting the amount of salt that we intake, limiting the amount of sugar that we intake. So all of those things are really important parts, along with taking the medication and maintaining a regular regimen of visits, excuse me, regular schedule of visits with your primary care doctor or specialist if the specialist is necessary for the management of the disease. So all of those become important in terms of the treatment and control of chronic diseases in order to prevent the complications related to them. Now, I do want to also speak a bit about the relationship of chronic diseases and COVID, and why it's so important to both understand how to control the chronic diseases and what the susceptibility is, or what the risk is of a person who has some of these chronic diseases being exposed to COVID and infected by it and then becoming sick from it. So we do know that among those diseases that I mentioned, diabetes being one of them, particularly uncontrolled diabetes, which is why it's so important to have diabetes under good control. Kidney disease, which I didn't focus on, but kidney disease we do know is actually, there are significant numbers of African Americans who have chronic kidney disease, often related to poorly controlled hypertension, as we talked about, and diabetes. And so we see those numbers significantly high. Now, as it relates to COVID, we know that in Native Americans, for example, they're almost 3 times more likely to be infected with COVID as compared to to white populations, and hospitalized about 5 times more, die about 1.5 times more frequently than Caucasians do to related to COVID. When we talk about African Americans, those numbers are very similar. So about 2.6 times higher in terms of the number of cases or the likelihood of being diagnosed, about 4.7 times higher, higher in terms of the likelihood of being hospitalized, and about twice more likely to die than whites from COVID. And the numbers are, again, similar among the Latinx community, where we see about the same numbers, about 2.8 or so times more likely to be infected, and about 4.6 times more likely to be hospitalized, about the same in terms of death when compared to whites. But we do see significant burden burden of disease as it relates to the chronic diseases and COVID among communities that are non-white. And so I wanted to as I just kind of pass off, I'm looking at the time, I want to be very cognizant of that, but I did want to just kind of lay out some things that I hope we'll be able to discuss some more in the discussion period. But I wanted to really talk about, or just remind everyone of the importance of the lifestyle modifications that we talked about. One that I didn't mention is smoking. Smoking cessation is very important, or not starting smoking is very important in terms of the management and control of all of those chronic diseases that I mentioned. We know that smoking is actually the #1 preventable cause of disease in the US. So whether we're talking about various types of cancer, very particularly lung disease as a chronic disease, and stroke, many of the other diseases that we see occur, we know that smoking actually is the #1 preventable cause. So remember, we talked about, when we think about lifestyle modification, we think about those healthy lifestyle practices that I mentioned. Modification of lifestyle might also mean, what are the things that I need to do to make sure I'm taking my medications as prescribed? And if there is a problem, if I'm having a side effect, what are the things that I need to do to bring that to the attention of my physician? Do I need to, write lists? Do I need to feel empowered? We should feel, what do I need to do to feel more empowered to take those lists to the doctor, to follow the processes of the physician's office, to call the nurse line and leave our questions and things of that nature. So we think sometimes about lifestyle modification as these, extreme diets or an extreme exercise plan, but it's also those things that are around our day-to-day practices around taking medication and the ways that we empower ourselves with our healthcare providers. So I do want to stop there to be respectful of the time that we've laid out, and pass it on to Ms. Banowski. And I will answer any questions that anyone might have during our question and answer period. Ms. Banowski.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here with Dr. Kelsey, talking to y'all, and really hoping for a dialogue here about really living the healthy lifestyle that we want to live, right? I mean, we all want to live long. We all want to see our kids grow up. We also want to see those grandchildren get married. We want to feel our best. We want to have energy. We want to be able to do the things that we want to do and have that freedom to do those things for as long as possible. But there tends to be a couple of barriers, a couple of things that make it a little bit harder. And so I'd like to ask a question, and this comes up a lot for me. I am a health and wellness coach, so I really help people to make those lifestyle changes. And we found that they can be hard. Change is hard for a lot of different reasons. But first of all, I would like to put out a question to everybody and see what kind of answers we have back, and see kind of if I'm on the right track with this. So I'd like to ask you to type the #1 into the chat box if you agree with this statement. I have trouble getting motivated to make the healthy changes I want to make. So if you see the chat box, it's down at the bottom. You can hover your little mouse over it, and you should see to everyone. And if you could just go ahead and type a number 1 if you agree with that question. And the question again is, if you agree with this statement: I have trouble getting motivated to make healthy changes. Okay, I'm seeing lots of ones in the chat box, and that's not a surprise. So here we are talking about chronic disease and how do we prevent it? And if we do have a chronic disease, how do we manage it? And we all know that we are the only people that can actually make these changes, right? We can go to our doctors and we can get the information, and there is just so much information out there, a lot you've heard today. I also like to mention there was a webinar, or one part of the series, part 7, which was the first part of this 2-part Our Body series last week, and it is available on YouTube as a recording. Really amazing information about all the things that Dr. Kelsey sort of mentioned around nutrition and eating fruits and vegetables, some great tips on exercise, and then also talking about supplements and water intake and stress management, all these kinds of things that we all want to do, these changes that we want to make, because we all do want to feel good and live long. However, we see that motivation for many people tends to be one of the largest barriers. And there are a number of reasons for this. But one of the things that we have found, and I teach a lot of classes to people who are working to manage and to control their chronic disease and chronic issues. And one thing that we have found from a lot of research is that it feels very overwhelming to start to make changes, right? You feel like, oh my gosh, how am I going to eat all these vegetables? I'm going to have to go to the grocery store, and when I buy vegetables, they sometimes they go bad because I can't eat them fast enough, and then I have to learn how to cook them. And when am I going to have time to exercise? Like all of these things, and I'm actually speaking from experience because these are the very things that I deal with myself. And so one thing that we found to help with that is really to make small changes, take things in little itty bitty bite-sized pieces. And what we do is work with people to come up with what we call an action plan. So really getting very specific about what we want to do and taking it in like a tiny little piece. So for instance, I was having trouble getting motivated to exercise. So I used to go outside, I used to go to the gym. And then when the coronavirus started, a lot of my routines and things changed. And I just was like, what do I do now? I felt overwhelmed, I felt lost. And so I said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to start with 4 minutes. I'm just going to find something I can do for 4 minutes. And then 4 minutes turned into 4 times a day. And I do that every day with a friend of mine. We might get on video, on FaceTime, on our phone, and we'll watch each other. There's also Google Duo. There are these different video chats, and we'll just say, hey, how you doing? And we'll take 4 minutes and then do a little high five to the camera. So that's what I mean by starting small. So we've talked a lot about, Dr. Kelsey has talked a lot about these changes and why it's so important to control them, right? I mean, thinking about the kinds of things like vision loss, like having a heart attack, like having an amputation, those are really scary things. And so we do feel like, why can't we get motivated? Why can't we do these things? And again, a lot of time it is feeling overwhelmed and feeling very worried about what could happen if we don't. So another thing that we talk about in my classes are, how do you connect with your why? How do you begin to get motivated around like what's really important about making this decision? And so what I'd like to invite all of you to do right now, if you have a piece of paper or even just kind of think about it in your mind, is think about, I want to be healthy because, and think about all of the positive reasons, not just like because I don't want to feel bad, or I don't want to die before my time, those kinds of things. But think about what it means to really be healthy and to doing the kinds of things that help you to feel good and help you to live a long life. So maybe it's, I want to see my grandchildren grow up. I want to be able to like go hiking with my group. I have a group of girlfriends and I don't want to be left behind. They go on hikes up Stowe Mountain and I want to be able to do that with them. So I just want you to take just a few seconds, a minute or so to think about what is a reason I want to be healthy because, and if you feel comfortable, feel free to type it in the chat box. I'd love to hear what it is about making these changes that feels so good and feels right and feels positive and that really, when you think about making them, is really a driver for you. And, for me, it really is about my mobility. It really is about being able to go hiking and be outdoors in nature and not feel like I can't do the things that I want to do. So if you're able to do that, that can kind of help you get moving on figuring something that would be doable for you. So in this action plan, first of all, we start off with pick something that you want to do, not something that everyone else is telling you to do, the doctor's telling you to do. What is something that you want to do? Well, actually, I really wanted to try to increase my cardiovascular fitness because I do want to be able to go up Stowe Mountain. And I see someone here says, I want to keep traveling. I'm right there with you, Joan. I want to keep traveling too. And I've always said to myself, I want to be one of those people that can put my bag up in the overhead bin myself. Like, I want to be able to do that and not have to wait or ask someone else to do it for me. And, I know that won't always be possible. Hopefully I'll still be traveling and doing that when I'm, 90 years old, but for as long as I can. And so thinking about those things again, that really create that spark in you. And then once you do that, thinking about what it is that you do want to do. And like I said, for me, cardiovascular, I've always wanted to learn to do push-ups. And so that's one of the things I do for those 4-minute increments. And really being very exact about it. I'll do it for 4 minutes, or I'll do 10 of them, or I'll do it, let's see, I try to do it every day. I don't always, but I do it at least 4 times a week. So getting really specific and then thinking about how you can make it into a routine, right? So we brush our teeth every morning when we get up. That's a routine. We don't even think about it. We just do it, right? And so thinking about how can you make something into more of a routine, because the more routine it is, the more that you will not have to think about it. It's just something you do. You're not necessarily getting up and saying, oh man, I got to force myself to brush my teeth now. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow, right? So what kinds of things that you can kind of implement into your daily life, right? Because this is about every day, all the time, like really thinking about these things and making them into habits. So when I got into this 4 minutes, like little micro bursts of fitness, it was easy to do, like 4 minutes, I can do 4 minutes, right? And then just building on that. And so that's one of the keys to making some of these changes. And again, as Dr. Kelsey said, how important it is to really kind of be more in control of what of your life, right? And be a good self-manager of your symptoms, of your health, of your choices, because unfortunately there just isn't an easy way. And I believe it was Dr. Rook last week said, I wish there was a magic pill. I wish, there was something that, we could flip a switch and it would be easier, and it isn't. So we all have to take responsibility and kind of see what works for us. I've decided that, forcing myself to, get up and try to walk the neighborhood. I like walking the neighborhood, but it's been so hot, it didn't work. So I stopped kind of pushing myself to do that and found something that did. So finding something that works for you, and what works for you might not be what works for, another person in your family, or what your doctor's saying. Of course, we have to follow our doctor's orders, but in terms of what this looks like in our lives, going walking around the neighborhood, as one of my doctors said, that's an easy thing to do. It's right there. Well, not in 90-degree heat, at least for me. So I'll stop there and maybe open up for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Ms. Banowski, and thank you, Dr. Kelsey, for extremely informative presentations. I encourage the attendees, the family members that are on today's meeting, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box. You are also free to open your mic and to share your perspectives. Okay, that was a bit faster than I was expecting, but we'll start with the first question. Are mental health conditions considered, or can they be considered chronic diseases? And if so, how do we effectively manage our mental health during this time?
That's an excellent question. And yes, in fact, usually when I discuss chronic diseases, I do mention mental health. So thank you for raising that question. So yes, it's, it falls in that same category by the definition that I mentioned in terms of, that it needs ongoing maintenance, sometimes medication, and that there are complications that can occur related to untreated mental illness or mental disease. And some of that is complications related to our relationships. Some of it is complications related to what one might do to him or herself. And so so absolutely, it's a chronic disease. Now, what do we do to help manage it? Well, there are a few things. Certainly, for a person who has not yet been diagnosed with a mental health disease, but is beginning to notice some symptoms, particularly now of depression or anxiety. So, not having an interest in doing things that you would normally do, having a down mood, having an increased or decreased appetite, increased or decreased sleep patterns or sleep. Feeling more anxious, if we talk about anxiety. And certainly any thoughts about hurting oneself, any feelings of being out of control, those would all be signs of a need to seek help. Now we know that the conditions that we're in right now, whether it be related to COVID and the fact that we're a lot more isolated now than we typically would be, or if we're talking about the issues in terms of the current social climate and racial climate that we're in, those are all things that are significant stressors. And so even for someone who's not previously diagnosed with a mental health disease, then this can be something where those symptoms can begin to surface. So certainly seeking out the assistance or the help of a mental health professional. If there's a sense of wanting to hurt oneself, then obviously seeking even more immediate assistance, whether it be through a hotline, the emergency department, what have you. Now, in terms of someone who's already been diagnosed with a mental health disease, then it's the kind of there's almost increased access to an extent now to the mental health professionals, in that many of them are doing all of their visits virtually. So there is access. I actually was, I wish I could. There's an organization called AACOMA. If you look it up, it's AACOMA, I believe, and I don't remember what the acronym is, but they actually have mental health services as well nationally. That if you contact them, then they have some services or can direct you to mental health services, to a professional that can meet with you even by way of a virtual visit. So, and there are other ones, but that's one that just comes to mind most readily. So I know this is a long response to a short question, but it's really an important question that you ask, and I'm grateful that you did ask it. So again, engaging with your mental health professional, if you already have the diagnosed mental health disease, and making sure that you're taking any medication that may have been prescribed, and certainly engaging in those other lifestyle practices such as exercise, which we know does help to release the chemicals called endorphins that we call the happy hormones and the chemicals in the body, eating healthy food, limiting alcohol, and then exercising and doing other meditative practices that help to improve and address mood and other issues that may be related to mental health. I don't know if you had anything, Wendy, but on that.
That's, yeah, absolutely. So I'll use it as a segue to also mention that there are a number of programs available that help people become self-managers or work on managing their chronic conditions. The Atlanta Regional Commission has a number of classes and things. And so if I might, I'd like to recommend that anyone that would like to learn more about free classes that are available in the Metro Atlanta area for anyone, do a Google of Empowerline in Atlanta. It's EMPOWERLINE. And I can also give you the number, 404-463-3333. If you call that number, or if you look at Empowerline, you can learn more about the free programs that are offered. For instance, I teach a couple of 6-week classes. One class is for people who have diabetes. Another class is for people who have any kind of chronic condition, including a mental chronic condition. So it really is very comprehensive. And also you get the support of other people who are going through the same thing. And it's a great way to share and help each other. There's a lot of great resources and a free textbook that's offered with the program too.
Thank you. Our next question is regarding adolescent health. So consider, how would you help, or what advice would you give to a parent or a guardian who is assisting a child in managing their chronic disease, particularly if this chronic disease makes the child predisposed to adverse outcomes associated with COVID-19?
So if I'm understanding correctly, kind of essentially the conversation that we're having around managing chronic disease in an adolescent?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So, that's a good question because certainly adolescence is a stage of life where they often, many will feel invincible. So have a chronic disease and don't necessarily realize, if they've not had a complication related to it, that they can in fact succumb to a complication related to it. And they are more risky. And they often are going to push the envelope a little more, will like to challenge more, the instructions that are being given to them. So with an adolescent, in the same way that, but also about adolescents, is that they're beginning to develop some critical thinking skills. And so being able to tap into that notion of why is important, being able to tap into the idea around, what can happen, and even in some instances point to some instances of other persons in their same age group that may have had challenges related to not just COVID, which we are in fact seeing now more reports of younger people who are becoming very ill and even dying from COVID. And so making them, kind of aware of that, but while also trying to understand for an adolescent, they're at a stage of development too, where for them it's important to be understood, and for their kind of motivations for things to be understood and respected and acknowledged. And so having some conversations around, why do you not want to take, what is it that's frightening, or what is it that may not feel feel right about taking the medication or about exercising or about eating this diet that maybe you don't see your friends eating. And so, so those are some of the things, really kind of trying to understand for an adolescent where they are in terms of their stage of development and meeting them where they are. And so that's not different from really anybody at any age, but for an adolescent, I do realize that it's a bit tricky because they are experiencing so many different changes during this time of life. But just remembering kind of what those things, what things, what some of the tapping into some of the key things that are germane to this the stage of development, particularly that that they want to be understood. So kind of starting with a place of understanding first where they're coming from if they've been resistant to following the recommendations for managing their chronic disease, and then knowing that they're beginning also to develop some other higher level thinking skills, and so then to be able to kind of just have those conversations with them. And it's not easy. And so although I use the word just, I don't mean just. I recognize that it's not an easy undertaking. Patience and continuing to kind of have those conversations is important. And then even if there, and in some places there are even support groups with other adolescents who have chronic diseases. And so, so identifying places where they have those support groups would be helpful also.
Thank you so much. Ms. Banowski, from the perspective of a health coach, how can families work together to reduce their risk of, or to prevent chronic diseases or to manage chronic diseases, as a family unit?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it really is important that all members, as much as possible, are on the same page, right? I've often seen where there may be one family member who's trying to make changes, for instance, nutritional changes and trying to eat more fruits and vegetables, and the rest of the family isn't really on board. And so it makes it a little harder for the one person to do that. You know, what does this one person do? Make a different meal and then from everybody else. And so it really, I think it starts off with a family conversation about what's important to this family, what are our values, what do we want for ourselves, and really soliciting all family input so that everyone feels that they're being heard and that this is not just something that perhaps the parents, the guardians are asking the kids and the rest of the family to do, but really making it into sort of a family decision together and thinking about what does a family really want in the long run versus thinking about, okay, we're going to start, having 3 vegetables with every meal. And when we get up in the morning, we're all going to, take a walk or whatever, but really asking all the family members, what does being healthy look like to you? What kinds of things would feel good to you to do that would contribute to your health? And thinking about and educating all the family members, because some kids, again, the younger generation, they sort of feel invincible and, why do I have to think about this now? But really helping them to see that this is an investment in their future, in their future selves. And then it's important to the family as a whole to live, to live their values. And then the last thing, but not the least thing, is really trying to find ways to make it fun, right? So recently I saw a neighbor who she's, and not everybody has time to do this, but I think she was to try to get her daughter to eat some more vegetables. She was cutting them into cute shapes and, making the vegetables really colorful and, arrange them on the plate and stuff. And that's, not always possible, but maybe just as a way to get the family kind of interested, making it into a game, just sort of it not being a chore, right? So there's this saying many of us have heard of, shoulds. We have so many shoulds. I should be eating that. I should be eating that. You should do this. And I always like to say, let's don't should on ourselves. Let's try to find things that make us feel good, that we like to do, and start taking small steps and have fun with it, right? Like make it interesting, find different ways to do that.
Thank you so much. So we have one more question, and then I will ask you, Dr. Kelsey, and you, Ms. Banowski, for your charge for the family, as in all of us attending today's session, moving forward. So what we should do moving forward with regard to preventing our risk of chronic disease and or managing chronic disease if we have been diagnosed with a chronic disease. So our last question is pertaining to mental health, and the author of the question recognizes that Black communities may not seek mental health services or treatment. Instead, African Americans or Black community members may engage in praying. So the question is, how do we reduce the stigma associated with mental health service seeking or even a mental health diagnosis among communities of color? And that question is for both panelists.
Sure. Yes. One of the ways I think to reduce the stigma is to talk about it more. You know, there's there and we well there are two parts to the response to that question. One is that being strong, mentally strong, is often worn as a medal of honor, whatever that strength means. And so if someone is challenged by, say depression, if someone is challenged by, feeling anxious, which, in this climate, we are seeing again increased rates of that and the complications related to it with higher suicide and things of that nature. So, so beginning to talk about it more is part of the kind of reducing the stigma. And then making sure that, so that's one part of it. The other part of it is from both the medical community recognizing too that people of African descent, many people of Latin in the Latinx community, and certainly we know also among Native American communities that spirituality is very important and is a part of healing, and making sure that there's an understanding that there's a connection between the mental, the physical, and the spiritual, and that they're in fact one. And so as a medical community, recognizing that and then not shaming a person who says that they are going to pray as part of or they're going to meditate, or they're going to, speak to their ancestors and pour libation as part of their approach to healing. That not shaming a person or not having one to think that's not effective or won't be an important part of their healing process. And so that's the part that we should own. And so, so certainly as we think about removing the stigma, then that really goes on that kind of is from the standpoint of the medical community, but then and also in the Black community at large, in terms of when we see these cases or these instances of mental illness arise and because each of us, has had family members or people who we know. And so talking about it so that, not so much that it's normalized, but maybe so that it's understood that in the same way that a person can have hypertension, and we don't look down upon a person who has hypertension, that if a person has depression or anxiety, that we understand that is indeed a mental illness that needs to be addressed, acknowledged, and addressed. And that's the full comprehensive addressing of those issues. And so it's a long fought battle, one that we just have to continue to keep our feet on the pedal as it relates to addressing that, because it's something that we must remove that stigma. And must really kind of stress the importance of having some attention to the mental health disorders.
Yeah, so Dr. Kelsey, you really addressed it so beautifully, and we have to. I mean, it really is an imperative. And I think the problems are just getting worse, really, for many people, not just communities of color, but all of us, especially in this time of social isolation, and people are just not communicating, and they're feeling much more alone. And so what I would add is really, if anyone on this call, during this session, or knows of anyone and sees anyone who's down, really talk to people. I think one of the things we've seen is that people who do have some kind of and it might not be a diagnosed mental health, condition. It could just be they're feeling down for a period of time because of, circumstances or something. And but talk to people, because more people feel the way that you do than you know. A lot of times in my classes, they're very interactive, and we're finding that a lot of people are like, so you feel that way too. There are times you just don't want to get out of bed either. Oh my gosh, I thought I was the only one. I thought there was something wrong with me. So really encouraging people to talk about their feelings, to talk about what's going on for them, not to be afraid. And even if they don't feel safe, maybe finding a close friend, a close relative, their doctor, just someone to really to talk about, so they don't feel quite so alone, and so like there's something wrong with them. Because it really is, honestly, I think the statistics are pretty high that all of us will experience some form of depression, whether it's due to a death in the family or something else, or whether it really is, some kind of physiological or some other kind of issue that's causing it. And I'll end by saying, I personally have two of my immediate family members have ended their lives. So this is very serious. And I believe that is happening more and more so. I'm coaching more and more people are having feelings of suicide, who have had relatives, sons and daughters. And so we absolutely have to start talking about this more, and really bringing it out in the open, and making it okay, and inviting more people to talk about what's going on with them. Because so many times we won't even know that a person was even feeling badly. They were just hiding it inside for so long. And that is one thing that we absolutely can continue to really address, and start asking people, how are you? How are you really, right?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Kelsey, and thank you, Ms. Banowski, for an extremely engaging and informative presentation. And now I will ask for you to issue your charge to us moving forward. So what is your charge for the future?
So my charge for the future is that we engage in the prevention actions, recognizing that that preventing chronic diseases is most important. And so taking care of ourselves, recognizing, again, as I mentioned, that as we know that our mind, body, and spirit are one, and if we recognize that we are in fact divine, then we will treat ourselves as such. And so, so let's begin to see ourselves as divine, and to think, as we know that, speak that, and do those health practices that will, in fact, allow us to be healthy and to live well. And again, that comes with our all of those practices that we talked about during this talk.
I absolutely agree. I think each one of us has an inner drive to thrive, to live well, and to be happy, and to really connect in with that. And, to be kind and compassionate with yourself, to not feel like you have to take it on all at once. But again, those small steps, they lead to bigger steps. Another thing I would recommend is really connecting with people, finding a accountability partner, as we talked about, engaging your family members in some of the things that you're doing, your friends. Just continue to stay connected, and finding people who support you to be your very best.
Thank you both. Thank you so much. And thank you for today's audience for attending and spending your Saturday evening with us during part 8 of the FAM Strong 20 virtual series. Additionally, we invite you to connect with the PRC via your favorite social media platform using hashtag FAMStrong20. On behalf of the Morehouse School of Medicine Prevention Research Center, we thank you for attending today's presentation and we wish you a wonderful afternoon.